change the perspective, spice it up a little. The body remembers. The psychophysiology of trauma and trauma treatment. Chapter 1. Overview of Posttraumatic Stress Disorder, PTSD. The impact of trauma and on body and mind. If it is true that at the core of our traumatised and neglected patients, disorganisation is the problem, that they cannot analyse what is going on when they re-experience the physical sensations of past trauma, but these sensations just produce intense emotions without being able to modulate them, then our therapy needs to consist of helping people to stay in their bodies and to understand these bodily sensations. And that is certainly not something that any of the traditional psychotherapies, which we've all been taught, help people to do very well. That the body remembers traumatic experience is aptly illustrated by the following case of Charlie and the dog. This case is presented in several parts, beginning with the first part that introduces Charlie's traumatic event and his resulting somatic and psychological symptoms. In subsequent chapters, the interventions that helped Charlie to resolve the impact of the traumatic incident will be detailed. In addition, illustrative references to Charlie will be woven throughout the text, providing a common thread connecting the theory and practice elements of this book. Charlie and the Dog, Part 1. A few years ago, out for a leisurely Sunday afternoon bicycle ride on a country lane, Charlie's pedalling reverie was suddenly broken as a large dog began to chase him. Ruff, ruff, ah! Roof, roof, barking furiously. Charlie's heart rate soared, his mouth went dry, and his legs suddenly had more power and strength than he had ever known. He pedalled faster and faster, but the dog matched and then exceeded his pace. Eventually the dog caught up and bit Charlie on his right thigh. As Charlie and his bike tumbled, the dog continued his barking attack. Charlie lost consciousness. Luckily, he had landed in a public area where several people rushed to his aid, chasing off the dog and calling an ambulance. Charlie's leg healed quickly, unlike his mind and nervous system. He continued to be plagued each time he saw a dog. Just the sight of one, even when locked in a house behind a door, a window and a fence, would cause Charlie to break into a cold sweat, go dry in his mouth and feel faint. Since that incident, he had kept his distance from all dogs, even pets of friends, avoiding contact wherever possible. He would habitually cross the street to evade a dog on his side of the street, whether on the sidewalk or behind a fence. He would never encourage contact, never talk or stroke a dog. As time passed, Charlie's life became more and more restricted, as he attempted to avoid any and all contact with dogs. Then, once, during a training session at a retreat centre, Charlie was unexpectedly confronted with his worst fear. He sat comfortably on a cushion, listening to a lecture, focused on the lecturer who stood to his left and not on his surroundings. Unbeknownst to Charlie, the centre's canine mascot, Ruff, had joined the group. Ruff quietly approached, uninvited from Charlie's right, outside of his field of vision, lay down and gently placed his head on Charlie's right leg, hoping for a pat. Charlie, feeling the weight on his leg, looked down and caught a glimpse of Ruff out of the corner of his right eye. He then immediately and literally froze in panic. Charlie's mouth went dry. His heart rate soared and his limbs stiffened to the extent that he was totally unable to move. He was barely able to speak. Charlie's reaction to Ruff was not just in his mind. Rationally, Charlie remembered the dog attack and he knew that he was scared of dogs. He also knew that Ruff was not attacking him. But all of his rational thoughts appeared to have no effect on his nervous system. Charlie's body reacted as if he was being, or about to be, attacked again. He became paralysed. What is it that occurred in Charlie's brain and body that caused such an extreme reaction in the absence of an actual threat? Why was Charlie unable to move or push the dog away? Why did he continue to go dry in the mouth and break into a cold sweat at the mere sight of a dog at a protected distance? What could be done to help Charlie cease these extreme reactions in the precedence of dogs? Answering these questions provides the underpinning of The Body Remembers. Trauma is a psychophysical experience, even when the traumatic event causes no direct bodily harm. That traumatic events exact a toll on the body as well as the mind is a well-documented and agreed-upon conclusion of the psychiatric community, as attested in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 4th edition of the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM-4. A major category in the symptom list of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is persistent symptoms of increased arousal in the autonomic nervous system. Yet, despite a plethora of study and writing on the neurobiology and psychobiology of stress, trauma and PTSD, the psychotherapist has until now had few tools for healing the traumatised body as well as the traumatised mind. Attention directed at the body has tended to focus on the distressing symptoms of PTSD, the resulting problems of adaptation and possible pharmacological intervention. Using the body itself as a possible resource in the treatment of trauma has rarely been explored. Somatic memory has been named as a phenomenon by Van der Kolk in 1994, but few scientifically supported theories and strategies for identifying it, containing it, and making use of it in the therapeutic process have emerged. Understanding how the brain and body process, remember, and perpetuate traumatic events holds many keys to the treatment of the traumatised body and mind. In some instances, direct somatic interventions, when used as adjuncts to existing trauma therapies, can be powerful in combating the effects of trauma. In addition, various somatic techniques can be used to make any therapy process easier to pace and less volatile. Attention to the somatic side of trauma need not require the practitioner to change his direction of focus. The tools offered here can be used or adapted within existing models of trauma therapy, expanding and enhancing what is already being done. The symptomology of PTSD. PTSD disrupts the functioning of those afflicted by it, interfering with their abilities to meet daily needs and perform the most basics of tasks. In PTSD, a traumatic event is not remembered and relegated to one's past in the same way as other life events. Trauma continues to intrude with visual, auditory, and or some other somatic reality on the lives of its victims. Again and again, they relive the life-threatening experience they have suffered, reacting in mind and body as though such events were still occurring. PTSD is a complex psychobiological condition. It can emerge in the wake of life-threatening experiences when psychological and somatic stress responses persist long after the traumatic event is past. There is a mistaken assumption that anyone experiencing a traumatic event will develop PTSD. This is far from true. Results of studies vary, but in general confirm that only a fraction of those facing such incidents, around 20%, will develop PTSD. Now, what distinguishes those who do not is still a controversial topic, but there are many clues. Non-clinical factors that mediate traumatic stress appear to include preparation for expected stress, when possible, successful fight or flight responses, developmental history, belief systems, prior experience, internal resources, and support. Non-clinical factors that mediate traumatic stress appear to include preparation for expected stress when possible, successful flight or fight responses, and developmental history, belief systems, prior experience, internal resources, and support from family, community, and social networks. In the history of psychology, PTSD is a relatively new diagnostic category. It first appeared in 1980 in the internationally accepted Authority on Psychology and Psychodiagnostic Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 3rd edition. DSM-3's definition of what could cause PTSD was limited. It was seen as developing from an experience that anyone would find traumatic. There were at least 2 problems with this definition. It left no room for individual perception or experience of an event, and it mistakenly assumed that everyone would develop PTSD from such an event. The currently accepted definition, as revised in DSM-4, is much broader. This definition takes into account that PTSD can develop in an individual in response to 3 types of events. 1. Incidents that are or are perceived as threatening to one's own life or bodily integrity. 2. Being a witness to acts of violence to others. Or 3. Hearing of violence to or the unexpected or violent death of close associates. Events that could qualify as traumatic for both adults and children, according to the DSM-4, include combat, sexual and physical assault, being held hostage or imprisoned, terrorism, torture, natural and man-made disasters, accidents, and receiving a diagnosis of a life-threatening illness. In addition, DSM-4 notes that PTSD can develop in children who have experienced sexual molestation, even if this is not life-threatening. It adds, the disorder may be especially severe or long-lasting when the stressor is of human design, e.g. torture or rape. Symptoms associated with PTSD include 1. Re-experiencing the event in varying sensory forms. 2. Avoiding reminders of the trauma. And 3. Chronic hyperarousal in the autonomic nervous system. DSM-4 recognises that such symptoms are normal in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event. PTSD is first diagnosed when these symptoms last more than 1 month and are combined with loss of function in areas such as one's job or social relationships. Somatic disturbance is at the core of PTSD. People who suffer from it are plagued with many of the same frightening body symptoms that are characteristics of ANS, the autonomic nervous system, hyperarousal experienced during a traumatic incident, as was Charlie. Accelerated heart rate, cold sweating, rapid breathing, heart palpitations, hypervigilance, and hyperstartle response, jumpiness. When chronic, these symptoms can lead to sleep disturbances, loss of appetite, sexual dysfunction, and difficulties in concentrating, which are further hallmarks of PTSD. DSM-4 acknowledges that symptoms of PTSD can be incited by external as well as internal reminders of a traumatic event, cautioning us that somatic symptoms alone can trigger a PTSD reaction. PTSD can be a very vicious circle. Distinguishing stress, traumatic stress, PTS and PTSD. Hans Selye defined stress as the non-specific response of the body to any demand, generally regarded as a response to negative experiences. Stress can also result from desired positive experiences, such as marriage, moving, a job change, and leaving home for college. The most extreme form of stress is, of course, stress that results from a traumatic incident, traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress is traumatic stress that persists following a traumatic incident. It is only when post-traumatic stress accumulates to the degree that it produces the symptoms outlined in the DSM-4 that the term post-traumatic stress disorder can be applied. PTSD implies a high level of daily dysfunction. Though there are no statistics, one can guess that there are a significant number of trauma survivors with PTS, those who fall between the cracks, not recovered from their traumas, but without the debilitation of PTSD. These individuals can also benefit from trauma therapy. Charlie's level of disturbance is typical of PTS. It caused him restriction in one area of his life, avoidance of dogs, but he functioned normally in the rest of his life. Change the pattern. Change the cross. Survival and the nervous system. Arousal, and therefore traumatic hyperarousal, is mediated by the limbic system, which is located at the centre of the brain, between the brainstem and the cerebral cortex. This part of the brain regulates survival behaviours and emotional expression. It's primarily concerned with tasks of survival, such as eating, sexual reproduction, and the instinctive defences of fight and flight. It also influences memory processing. The limbic system has an intimate relationship with the autonomic nervous system. It evaluates a situation, signalling the ANS either to have the body rest or to prepare it for effort. The autonomic nervous system plays a role in regulating smooth muscles and other viscera, heart and circulatory system, kidneys, lungs, intestines, bladder, bowel, pupils. Its two branches, the sympathetic branch, the SNS, and the parasympathetic branch, the PNS, usually function in balance with each other. When one is activated, the other is suppressed. The SNS is primarily aroused in states of effort and stress, both positive and negative, whereas the PNS is primarily aroused in states of rest and relaxation. The limbic system responds to extreme traumatic threat by releasing hormones that tell the body to prepare for defensive action. Following the perception of threat, the amygdala signals an alarm to the hypothalamus, both structures in the limbic system, that turns on two systems. One, activation of the SNS, and two, the release of corticotrophin, releasing hormone, the CRH. Those actions continue, each with a separate but related task. First, the activation of the SNS will, in turn, activate the adrenal glands to release epinephrine and norepinephrine to mobilise the body for fight or flight. This is accomplished by increasing respiration and heart rate to provide more oxygen, sending blood from the skin and in Charlie's case, the increased respiration and blood flow to his legs made it possible for him to pedal faster and further than usual. At the same time, in the other system, the CRH is activating the pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which will also activate the adrenal glands, this time to release a hydrocortisone, cortisol. Once the traumatic incident is over and or the fight or flight has been successful, the cortisol will halt the alarm reaction and the production of epinephrine, norepinephrine, helping to restore the body to homeostasis. This system is called the HPA axis. The reason it is important to trauma work is that in PTSD, something goes wrong with it. Rachel Yehuda pioneered the discovery that in those with PTSD, the adrenal glands do not release enough cortisol to halt the alarm reaction. Several studies have shown that individuals with PTSD have lower cortisol levels than controls, even those with other psychological problems like depression. One conclusion that can be drawn from this evidence is that on a chemical level, the continued alarm reaction typical of PTSD is due to a deficiency of cortisol production. However, whether it is purely biological process or influenced by perception in the limbic system is not known. While the low cortisol levels are documented in PTSD, their cause is still a question. One area of interest with regard to the HPA axes and cortisol is the freezing response to traumatic threat. When death may be imminent, escape is impossible, or the traumatic threat is prolonged, the limbic system can simultaneously activate the PNS. When death may be imminent, escape is impossible, or the traumatic threat is prolonged, the limbic system can simultaneously activate the PNS, causing a state of freezing called tonic immobility. Like a mouse going dead when caught by a cat, or stiff like a deer caught in headlights. The chemical picture that causes the freeze must be linked to the HPA axes, but this has not been studied as yet. These nervous system responses, fight, flight and freeze, or tonic immobility, are automatic survival actions. They are similar to reflexes in that they are instantaneous, but the mechanisms underlying these responses are much more complex than a simple reflexes. If the perception in the limbic system is that there is adequate strength, time and space for flight, then the body breaks into a run. If the limbic perception is that there is not time to flee, but there is adequate strength to defend, then the body will fight. If the limbic system perceives that there is neither time nor strength for fight or flight, and death could be imminent, then the body will freeze. In this state, the victim of trauma enters an altered reality. Time slows down and there is no fear or pain. In this state, if harm or death do occur, the pain is not felt as intensely. People have fallen from great heights or been mauled by animals and survived. Reports just such a reaction. The freeze response might also increase chances of survival. If the cause is an attack by man or beast, the attacker may lose interest once the prey has gone dead, as a cat will lose interest in a lifeless mouse. Charlie lost consciousness during the dog attack, and when later confronted by contact with a dog, he became paralysed. Both are forms of freezing responses. It is important to understand that these limbic system, ANS responses, are instantaneous, instinctive, responsive to perceived threat, the individual's perceived threat. They are not chosen by thoughtful consideration. Many who have suffered trauma feel much guilt and shame for freezing or going dead, and not doing more to protect themselves or others by fighting back or running away. In those instances, understanding that freezing is automatic often facilitates difficult process of self-forgiveness.
I am going to open the group room if you wanted to come. All right, no worries.
Thank you. Defensive response to remembered threat. When the limbic system activates the ANS to meet the threat of a traumatic event, it is a normal, healthy, adaptive survival response. When the ANS continues to be chronically aroused, even though the threat has passed and has been survived, that is PTSD. The traumatic events seem to continue to float. Why do I keep putting the THs on the Fs? It's over at the start. But the traumatic event seems to continue to float free in time, rather than occupying its locus in one's past, often coming unbidden into the present perception as if it were indeed occurring now. Charlie was never again attacked by a dog. However, each time he encountered one, he continued to respond in his mind and body as if he were being or about to be attacked again. Within the limbic system are two related areas that are central to memory: storage, the hippocampus and the amygdala. The last few years have produced a growing body of research that indicates these two parts of the brain are centrally involved in recording, filing, and remembering traumatic events. The amygdala is known to aid in the processing of highly charged emotional memories, such as terror and horror, becoming highly active both during and while remembering a traumatic incident. The hippocampus, on the other hand, gives time and space, context to an event, putting our memories into their proper perspective and place in our life's timeline. Hippocampal processing gives events a beginning, a middle and an end. This is very important with regard to PTSD, as one of its features is a sense that the trauma has not yet ended. It has been shown that the activity of the hippocampus often becomes suppressed during traumatic threat. Its usual assistance in processing and storing an event is not available. When this occurs, the traumatic event is prevented from occupying its proper position in the individual's history and continues to invade the present. The perception of the event as being over and the victim as having survived is missing. This is likely mechanism at the core of the quintessential PTSD system of flashback. Episodes of reliving the trauma in mind and or body. Surprisingly, dissociation, there's a subtitle on this one, dissociation, freezing and PTSD. Dissociation, freezing and PTSD. Surprisingly, dissociation, a splitting in awareness, buzz it away, buzz it away, buzz it away. Surprisingly, dissociation, a splitting in awareness, is not mentioned by either the DSM-3 or the DSM-4 as a symptom of PTSD, though it is acknowledged as a symptom of acute stress disorder. There is a growing debate as to whether PTSD is actually a dissociative disorder rather than an anxiety disorder, as it is currently classified. At the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, a panel debated this issue. No one really knows what dissociation is or how it occurs, though there is much speculation. Speculation indeed. It appears to be a set of related forms of split awareness. The wide range of splitting covers events as simple as forgetting why you were going into a kitchen, and as extreme as dissociative identity disorder, previously called multiple personality disorder. Breathe and hum a buzz. She might fucking might. The kind of dissociation described by those with PTSD during their traumatic event or events, altered sense of time, reduced sensations of pain, absence of terror or horror, resembles the characteristics of those who report having responded by freezing to a traumatic threat. There will need to be more research before it can be known if the freezing response is a form of dissociation. Blatantly. Sorry. Understanding this mechanism is important because it appears that the most severe consequences of PTSD result from dissociation. While dissociation appears to be an instinctive response to save the self from suffering, and it does this very well, it exacts a high price in return. There are several areas of research into the phenomenon of dissociation. Many indicate the likelihood that dissociation during a traumatic event predicts the eventual development of PTSD. Consequences of trauma and PTSD. The consequences of trauma and PTSD vary greatly depending on the age of the victim, the nature of the trauma, and the response to the trauma, and the support to the victim in the aftermath. In general, those afflicted with PTSD suffer reduced quality of life due to intrusive symptoms, which restrict their ability to function. They may alternate periods of overactivity with periods of exhaustion as their bodies suffer the effects of traumatic hyperarousal of the ANS. That's the autonomic nervous system. Reminders of the trauma they suffered may appear suddenly, causing instant panic. They become fearful, not only of the trauma itself, but also of their own reactions to the trauma. Body signals that once provided essential information become dangerous. For example, heart rate acceleration that might indicate overexertion or excitement become a danger signal in itself because it is a reminder of the accelerated heart of the trauma response, and is therefore associated with trauma. The ability to orient to safety and danger becomes decreased when many things, or sometimes everything, in the environment are perceived as dangerous. When daily reminders of trauma become extreme, freezing or dissociation can be activated as if the trauma were occurring in the present. It can become a vicious cycle. Eventually, a victim of PTSD can become extremely restricted, fearing to be with others or to go out of her home. Eventually, a victim of PTSD can become extremely restricted, fearing to be with others or to go out of her home. As mentioned before, Charlie had PTS, not PTSD. The degree of his restriction never reached this extreme. However, he was becoming increasingly restricted with each fearful canine encounter. It's not funny. And the potential for developing PTSD lingered. Sorry. How is it possible for the mind to become so overwhelmed that it is no longer able to process a traumatic event to completion and file it away in the past? The next chapters move towards possible answers to this question. And yes, make it funny. Make anything funny. Humour enables you to relax. Smile and the world smiles with you. Smile and it's not actually that serious. Because if you're in the present, you're not in the past and you're not in the future. So therefore it doesn't exist. So just reprogram and retrain that beautiful mind of yours. Development, memory, and the brain. Brains in the membrane. In many instances, people who experience traumatic events are able to process and resolve those episodes free of long-term effects. They are able to recall and narrate the events that befell them make sense of what happened, have emotions appropriate to their memories, and feel confident that the incident lies in their past. In people still plagued by their traumas, those with PTS and PTSD, memory of traumatic events is different. It usually falls into one or two divergent categories. Some traumatised people will remember the traumatising events in precise detail, able to describe what happened as if they were watching a video replay. In these cases, PTS or PTSD persists because these individuals are not able to make sense of the events or some aspect of them. They may still be disturbed by intense emotions and or bodily sensations, seemingly unconnected to the traumas they suffered. Charlie's memory of the dog attack is an example. He remembered the details up to the point where he had lost consciousness, but continued to feel in danger each time he was in the vicinity of a dog, no matter how benign that dog was. Or they might feel numb in body and or emotions and complain of a sense of deadness in their lives. Others remember little, if any, of the actual traumatic events, but are plagued by physical sensations and emotional reactions that make no sense in the current context. Whether the trauma is remembered or not, for those with PTS and PTSD, slow down, softly, slowly, gently. The realisation that it lies in the past and that the danger is over is attained only with difficulty. A look into how the brain develops may reveal clues to help us understand these types of memory distortion. The developing brain. The newborn's brain is by no means a fait accompli, not even close. At birth, the brain is among the most immature of the body's organs. In fact, it is much like a new computer, equipped with a basic operating system that incorporates all that will be needed for future development and programming, memory file storage, all that will be needed for future development and programming, memory file storage and expansion, but as yet unable to do much beyond the basic system requirements. The human brain is, for the most part, malleable, programmable and reprogrammable. In its organisation, it is highly responsive to external influences. In fact, the higher and more complex the brain structure, the greater its malleability, the mercurial mind. The cerebral cortex is the most complex, as well as the most flexible and easily influenced structure. The brainstem, and the back, is the least complex and least malleable structure in the brain. The brain's susceptibility to influence and change is necessary for growth and development. Without the ability of our brains to adapt and change, it would be impossible to learn anything. Growth, development, and change are necessary to health and to survival. Though it remains flexible throughout the lifespan, the brain's capacity for alteration does decrease with age. And of course, the first days, months, and years of life are crucial for establishing the foundations of latter capacities and talents, as well as deficits. How a brain first organises is dependent on the infant's interactions with its environment. How a brain continues to grow, develop, and recognise is dependent on the subsequent experiences encountered throughout a child's life. As no two life experiences are the same, even for identical twins, it is the brain's malleability that makes each of us unique. Recognising that the brain's organisation is flexible and subject to influence is crucial to understanding both how dysfunctional emotional patterns, such as PTSD, can develop and how they can be changed. From the beginning, the infant brain has the instincts and reflexes that are needed for existence. heartbeat, respiration reflexes, the ability to take in and make use of nourishment, search, suck and swallow reflexes, digestion and elimination, and to benefit from contact, sensory pathways, grasp reflexes. This basic brain system is not enough to ensure the infant's survival. The baby needs a more mature human. The primary caretaker usually, but not always. Its mother. To care for and protect it. Moreover, many believe it is the interaction between baby and caretaker that determines normal brain and nervous system development. None of this is new. Babies depend on their caregivers for every aspect of their survival. Caregivers who are able to provide for infants emotional as well as physical needs, nurture them into toddlers, children, teens and adults with a wide scope of resources. Increasingly, they are able to take over caring for their own needs in adaptive and beneficial ways. Well cared for babies become adults with resilience who are able to swing with the punches dished out by life. Their brains are able to process and integrate both positive and negative experiences, adding adaptive learning to their repertoire of behaviours and attitudes. Let's do the yoga integration mudra. Can't see the bell. Right arm, left arm in front. Right arm, top of left arm. Right arm on top of left arm. Turn left arm palm to face right hand palm. Interlock fingers with the right baby finger on top. And draw into heart. I like to roll it down, put the arms above my head, and then put the hands behind my neck. And that gives proper alignment in the cervical neck spine up through that cerebellum spinal brain cord. Down back. Down the back. Down the back. Back the down. Back the down. Back the down. KCABEHT NWOD. Ooh. Ooh. Their brains are able to process and integrate both positive and negative experiences, adding adaptive learning to their repertoire of behaviours and attitudes. On the other hand, babies raised by caregivers, unable to meet significant proportions of their needs, are at risk of growing into adults who lack resilience and have trouble adapting to life's ebbs and flows. We're fine as long as we're in the present moment. Typhoon Haiyan, building the fan, travelling, many things. Things, people and the things, people and the things, things and the people. Their brains may be less able to process life's experiences. They appear to have more difficulty making sense of life's events, particularly those that are stressful, and to be more vulnerable to psychological disturbances and disorders, including drug addiction, depression, and PTSD. There is a growing body of research that describes how healthy bonding and attachment are crucial to the healthy development from the first days of life. Whew. The attachment relationship stimulates brain development, which in turn expands and enables an individual's ability to cope emotionally throughout life. Science is finally catching up with parents and psychotherapists who have always known that this was true, but didn't know why or how. It is now believed that the nurturing interaction between caregiver and infant goes a long way in promoting healthy emotional development. Because that relationship in itself stimulates normal maturation of the brain and nervous system. A few basics. What follows is a very brief overview of how the brain develops. Later chapters will expand on these basics. The material included here will be limited to what is necessary for the purpose of understanding how the brain development eventually affects the processing of traumatic incidents. The brain is the control centre of the nervous system. It regulates body temperature, it tells us when to seek nourishment, and it directs all the functions involved in eating, digestion, and elimination. It tells our heart to beat, excuse us, it tells our heart to beat and causes us to inhale and exhale. Without the brain, procreation would be impossible, and the human species would die out. In addition, like a computer processes information, it receives information through all of this body's sensory pathways. Sight, which includes written words. Hearing, which includes spoken words. Taste, touch, smell. Proprioception, which informs the body's spatial and internal states. And the vestibular sense, which indicates which way is up. I do know it's upside down, by the way. I was just like changing the perspective. Oh, don't you love the number synchronicities? Numero Catravandi set. That's 97, not 87. Oh well. Nervous system communication. The term synapse refers to a junction of two nerve cells, neurons. It is at this site that the signal or information from one nerve transfers to the next, as if a spark jumps the gap. The communication from this one cell to the next can be accomplished with either an electrical impulse or via a chemical neurotransmitter that passes from one cell to the other. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are examples of neurotransmitters. These hormones are secreted in response to traumatic stress. Epinephrine by the sympathetic nerves and the adrenal glands. I know I'm not saying these right. Norepinephrine by the sympathetic nerves is in the rest of the body. When enough norepinephrine secretes from the sympathetic nervous endings along the path from synapse to synapse, the body is ready to flight or flee. Strings of synapses link neurons in configurations that produce the complex activities that are carried out by the brain and the body. Each string of synapses produces a single result: the contraction of a muscle, the recall of an image, the blink of an eye, the stomach sensation of butterflies. One heartbeat. The gasp of a surprise. Combinations of synapse strings produce more complicated results. Walking, talking, solving a math problem, understanding a written paragraph, remembering the details of a movie, realising one is cold and turning up the heat. All of the information coming into the body and brain through the senses is realised and registered through discrete sets of synapses. And each reflex, behaviour, emotion, or thought is produced through discrete sets of synapses. All experiences are encoded, recorded, and recalled through synapses. The brain regulates all body processes and behaviours through synapses. I think it's got to be Biology of Belief next, doesn't it? Bruce Lipton on synapses. Okay, so the brain regulates all body processes and behaviours through synapses that connect efferent nerves, brain to body. Likewise, the body reports back to the brain on its internal state and position in space through synapses connecting afferent nerves, body to brain rather than brain to body. It is also through sets of synapses that individual thoughts become linked as concepts or tied to specific events. Cognitive memory involves the linking of the nerves via synapses within the brain. Somatic memory requires that sensory nerves be linked via synapses to the brain, then recorded within the brain. There is nothing fixed about the sequence of synapses, however. They are subject to influence and can be changed. New learning is achieved through the creation of new synapse strings or adaptation of existing ones. Forgetting, e.g. how to do something, is the result of disuse of synapse settings, of synapse strings. Bunch of tongue twisters, isn't it? Forgetting, e.g. how to do something, is the result of disuse of synapse strings. As the saying goes, use it or lose it. So many S's. It is also, for better or worse, through the alteration of synapses that memory can become distorted. Divisions of the brain. It is easy to conceptualize what the brain looks like. That worked. Make your right hand into a fist, holding it upright. Your right wrist represents the brain stem. Your right wrist represents the brain stem. Your fist, the midbrain and limbic system. Now take your left hand and cover your right fist. That is the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain. The brain stem, sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain, the crocodile brain, regulates basic bodily functions such as heart rate and respiration. This region of the brain must be mature at birth for an infant to survive. I call that bit of the brain the bridge. So you've got your left brain, which is your logic brain, it's your past, it's your future. It enables one to function in society. And it functions to the right of your body, the masculine, the doing, the active. And then you have your right brain, the creative, the here and now, the present moment, the feminine, functioning the left part of the body, the receptive. And the crocodile brain, the old brain in the middle, bridges the two hemispheres together, enabling harmony and synchronicity. Intuition. The brainstem, sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain, regulates basic bodily functions such as heart rate and respiration. This region of the brain must be mature at birth for an infant to survive. The limbic system is the seat of survival instincts and reflexes. It includes the hypothalamus, which is responsible for maintaining body temperature, essential nutrition and hydration, rest and balance. The limbic system also regulates the autonomic nervous system. Interesting. Mediating smooth muscle and visceral responses to stress and relaxation. including sexual arousal and orgasm, and the traumatic stress reactions of fight, flight, and freeze. Two other limbic system regions, the hippocampus and the amygdala, are especially pertinent to understanding traumatic memory. Both the hippocampus and the amygdala consist of two lobes, one on each side of the brain. Both structures are integral to processing information transmitted from the body on the way to the cerebral cortex. The amygdala processes and then facilitates the storage of emotions and reactions to emotionally charged events. The hippocampus processes the data necessary to make sense of those experiences within the timeline of personal history. When during my life did this happen? And the sequence of the experience itself. What happened first? What happened next? Etc. Have found that the amygdala is mature at birth, and that the hippocampus matures later, between the second and third year of life. Understanding the difference in the maturational schedules, as well as the functions of these two structures, provides one explanation for the phenomenon of an infantile amnesia. The fact that we usually don't consciously remember our infancy. Infantile experiences are processed through the amygdala on the way to storage in the cortex. The amygdala facilitates storage of the emotional and sensory content of these experiences. Hippocampal function is not yet available, so the resulting memory of an infant experience includes emotion and physical sensations without context or sequence. This is probable explanation for why, in later life, infant experiences cannot be assessed as what we usually call memories. Mature and adequate function of both amygdala and hippocampus is necessary for sufficient processing of life's events, especially the stressful ones, though during a traumatic event this may not always be possible. As the stress level increases, hormones may be released that suppress hippocampal activity, while the amygdala As the stress level increases, hormones may be released that suppress hippocampal activity. While the amygdala remains unaffected, it is possible that prolonged cortisol secretion, as may be found with trauma, affects the hippocampus in this way. This might account for some of the memory distortion associated with PTSD. Some individuals with PTSD recall their traumatic experiences as highly disturbing emotional and sensory states, lacking the time and space, context that is facilitated by hippocampal function. Hippocampal size has been the subject of recent PTSD research. Several studies conclude that survivors of PTSD have smaller hippocampi, and the general population. These fascinating findings have not determined, however, whether the hippocampi of those with PTSD have shrunk due to the suppression of hippocampal activity by stress hormones, or whether these individuals had small hippocampi to begin with. Well, if you ask me, from my experiences, any kind of trauma, physical, mental, emotional, to a human, to a plant, to an animal, it stunts growth. Growth gets stunted because the energy has to be put into recuperation, rest, recharge, bringing back to optimum health. And then once optimum health or optimum resonant frequency has been restored, then growth can take place again. So yes, if there isn't the proper neurological, stimulation, education, awareness, foundations, learnings, hardware programming of the most amazing bioorganic computer of us human beings, then our brains become stunted or separated or dissociated, whatever is in your own personal makeup. But that's not to say that without gaining new information in whatever way works for you, that you can't bring your body back to that state of rest and digest. And once you reach that place, start growing again. Because I know for me, that is what is happening. So I believe anything is possible. And I can do anything. Why don't you give it a go? At any rate, it appears that smaller hippocampus size might interfere with the brain's processing of stressful life events. So take a break if you want. Lay down on that couch. Sit on that grass. Sit on the rocks and watch the sea. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Bryce. Thank you so much. The thalamus is also part of the middle brain. Its 2 parts flank the limbic system. It is the relay centre for sensory information coming from all points in the body on the way to the cortex. Overlaying the more primitive structures of the brain is the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for all higher mental functions, including speech, thought, and semantic and procedural memory. Currently, there is a great interest in the various information processing functions of the right and left cortices and their relationship to the limbic system. The right cortex appears to play a greater role in the storage of sensory input. It appears that the amygdala is the limbic structure through which sensory information travels on its way to the right cortex. Breathe and sigh. Breathe in the love, breathe in the light, breathe in the 2 parts gratitude, and sigh. Relax. Relaxing the face. Face reflex, face yoga is what intones up your internal organs. So you can lie in bed and just do some breath work and give your beautiful face a massage, knowing that you're exercising and toning up your internal organs. Overlaying the more primitive structures of the brain is the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for all higher mental functions, including speech, thought, and semantic and procedural memory. Currently, there is great interest in the various information processing functions of the right and left cortices and their relationship to the limbic system. The right cortex appears to play a greater role in the storage of sensory input. It appears that the amygdala is the limbic structure through which sensory information travels on its way to the right cortex. The left cortex, on the other hand, seems to have a more intimate relationship with the hippocampus. Moreover, it appears to depend on language for processing information. Bessel van der Kolk has found that activity in Broca's area, which is a left cortical structure responsible for speech production, is also suppressed, as is the hippocampus. I'm doing speaking, reading, mouth, all of it, therapy, yoga at the moment. Multitask, maximum output, minimum effort. He describes what he calls the speechless terror, the blind, deaf and dumb inside. He describes what he calls the speechless terror of trauma. We have all experienced being at a loss for words or forgetting what we were about to say. Under stress, this difficulty increases, sometimes to extreme degrees. In Charlie's case, he could still speak in his panicked state, but the speech apparatus was so constricted that he could barely squeak his words out. Oh, I don't have it. I do. We were going to ages ago, we were going to do the nervous and the secret language of the body, but the nervous system meditation, weren't we? But it didn't get done. But if that's functioned by the limbic system, we'll do a limbic system meditation. So before we get on after this to the Creation on Purpose book, the Biology of Belief book, and the Inner Bridges book. We'll do the Secret Language of Our Body meditation. And then we'll get on to the Yoga of the Subtle Body and the Tuning of the Human Biofield after the other ones. So yeah, it may have started a bit deep this morning, but it's going to get lighter and fuller. And then come back into love. Okay. We're stopping there on that one now. Au revoir. Namaste.